In his multi-volume history of the First World War, The World Crisis, Winston Churchill constructs a remarkably enclosed memory architecture. His narrative perspective is almost entirely locked to the battlefields of Western Europe. The text zeroes in on the political friction within the Allied High Command and the microscopic tactical failures of campaigns like the 1917 Nivelle Offensive. The boundaries of his strategic analysis rarely extend beyond the trench lines of the Western Front and the artillery-scarred ridges of the Crayon Plateau. We see this tight focus in his account of the April 1917 French mutinies, noting the rebellion of 16 Army Corps. He meticulously logs the physical toll on the infantry, documenting a Russian force used to absorb enemy fire, resulting in 6,000 casualties. Yet within this intricate documentation of troop movements and command decisions, transcontinental logistics, and specifically the massive manpower contributions of the Indian Army, are notably absent from the operational foreground. Churchill's memory structure for 1917 treats the survival of the Allied war effort as a strictly European high command exercise. The imperial periphery is deliberately omitted. 20 years later, that localized view completely fractures. In the Second World War, Churchill documents a sprawling multi-theater crisis where European survival depends entirely on external staging grounds. By late 1940, the British military apparatus faced simultaneous threat vectors stretching across the entire Indian Ocean basin, demanding rapid deployments to the Middle East, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. A September 1940 directive exposes this shift, prioritizing the diversion of Indian brigades to garrison the Malay Peninsula. The memo allocates another division for Basra and a corps for Iraq, with Churchill noting, "These commitments absorb all Indian reinforcements available for the coming year." The Indian Army was now being pulled across thousands of miles to plug critical gaps in a rapidly deteriorating global perimeter. Through sheer logistical necessity, the Indian Army transitioned from an omitted background detail in his World War I account to the central, fungible asset for hemispheric defense in World War II. That capacity for rapid deployment was pushed even further following the Japanese incursions into Malaya in December 1941. Emergency cables were dispatched to General Wavell, the commander-in-chief in India, ordering him to halt deployments and retain the 17th Indian Division to fortify local defense lines. India now bore a complex dual burden. It was an active, threatened front line on its eastern border, while simultaneously serving as the primary logistical staging hub for the entire region. This chart illustrates the sheer density. By mid-1941, the base supported 530,000 soldiers, 500 field guns, 350 anti-aircraft batteries, and 7,000 vehicles. From this centralized pool, Wavell was tasked with actively supplying 4 simultaneous campaigns across vast distances. Every pound of ammunition and every infantry draft relied on highly precarious communication and supply lines stretching deep into the Indian interior. India's value to the Allied command was dictated entirely by its mathematical capacity to absorb and project military hardware. When political instability threatened that capacity during the 1942 Cripps mission, Churchill treated the diplomatic friction not as a political debate, but as a direct operational threat to military integrity. In a cable to Roosevelt, Churchill rejects further diplomatic compromise, stating he would lay down his personal burden over the issue. He warns against allowing the staging ground to disintegrate, identifying the indispensable variable securing the region, the existing base, and the Indian Army. Yielding to American diplomatic requests risked disrupting the precise troop movements, ration distributions, and command structures that kept the Eastern Theater afloat. Churchill approached the defense of India strictly as the clinical preservation of his primary staging ground. Political negotiations were abruptly subordinated to logistical survival. By early 1944, the defense of that staging ground coalesced into the 14th British Imperial Army, an enormous fighting force stationed along the eastern frontier. Operating under Admiral Mountbatten, this army comprised between 250,000 and 300,000 men. It included Indian divisions redeployed from the Middle East, operating alongside British and African units. Combat in the Burma theater was defined by reciprocal infiltration, with both sides routinely maneuvering deep behind enemy front lines. Allied forces executed intricate airborne operations built around long-range penetration groups to attack Japanese rear echelons and sever their supply lines. As Japanese forces advanced westward and Allied troops pushed east, these massive opposing bodies collided and locked together along a contiguous 1,200-mile boundary. The operational objective was precise: fling the Japanese forces backward to protect the Indian frontier, while simultaneously reopening the critical land route to China. The fate of the entire hemispheric diversion now hinged squarely on the performance of this synthesized multi-ethnic imperial force. That remarkable performance was immediately challenged by a massive and brutal Japanese offensive converging on the high Imphal Plateau. Japanese units crossed the Chindwin River, cutting their way toward the high-ground garrisons at Imphal and Kohima to fracture the British Indian supply network. This advance directly threatened the security of the Hump, the critical high-altitude air supply highway extending deep into China. On June 22nd, Churchill authorized Mountbatten to divert aircraft from the Hump, prioritizing ammunition for the besieged Imphal garrison. But exactly as that message was sent, British and Indian relief columns broke the Japanese lines, meeting 29 miles north of Imphal to reopen the road. The Japanese forces, starved of rations and physically exhausted, were pushed back into the jungle. Their capacity to invade the subcontinent was completely destroyed. Churchill's World War II memoirs inadvertently document a new strategic reality. The survival of the empire was engineered through the granular, logistical redeployment of Indian assets, structurally refuting the Eurocentric memory model he had constructed decades earlier.